And we do want to take a moment to specifically address probably some questions that are coming up. I know there's conversation in chat, but specifically because that's a big bunch of the meat, and the rest of my slides are sort of a little bit more concluding. So if there are questions, I can read them from chat, or if or somebody else could potentially read them from chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask it yourself.
We can read them for you also, Katherine, if you want. Yeah. The current ones, in case there is interest from other people in the audience. So first, it was a question about the slides. Obviously, the recordings will be available, and the slides are in a link that we posted in the chat at the top. So you have them, then you can download them. The first question was about the renewal proposal. When is the deadline? Apparently, there has been a communication that is at the end of July, but the specific date is July 23rd.
Yes.
Yes. And a second question is, what is the size of an early career track project?
Oh, and I remember seeing that. I had loaded up on my phone, so so apologies if there were typos in my attempts to respond, as there were some typos as I was typing on my phone. And because I did want to address that, right, and I didn't mention it. So for early career, this is not meant to be, particularly small or particularly extra large for an INCITE award. So what that means is I really, there are some sort of minimums and there's some guidance, right, that the facilities are putting out, right, for what a reasonable size request is. And if you recall, right, I was showing you the median and average sizes on the resources, just because it was about 480K node hours on Summit and 1.2-ish, 1.1-ish million node hours on Theta. Early career tracks should, absolutely sort of be in that scale. I will say that when proposals get too small, so for example, on Theta, a proposal that is asking for like 100,000 node hours, that gets very challenging for us. And that I mean us as like both facilities. Proposals that are too small can be challenging because we want to commit support and staff to these resources. And so when we're actually trying to balance the total number of awards we have, it's challenging if there are too many awards. So I really suggest thinking about, that median size. It does not mean your proposal has to be 1.2 for Theta, right? We have proposals in this past year that, really do range from, 500 to almost 200, but they really did all mostly end up in the middle. So no special numbers for early career, but it allowed me a moment just to sort of touch on the average awards and thinking about the average sizes.
Next question is, how many Polaris node hours will be allocated through INCITE 2022?
And I think I took, I gave, with the attempt to still having to be a little bit vague, I gave an estimate of that online. The actual, because the mission of Polaris also has a slightly different bent, which is supporting some of the exascale computing project. We expect right now that it will be 50% of the time just for next year that's going into Polaris, and that it'll be 60% after that if people are still requesting time. The total number of node hours is approximately in the 300 to 350 million node hours that will be available for INCITE.
And two additional questions about Polaris is one, how can we ask for a new allocation? And the other one is, how can we take advantage of the new Polaris GPUs when we are in a renewal proposal, submitting a renewal proposal?
And to augment what I tried to write is, you may absolutely ask for your renewal time to be on Polaris. You may also ask for renewal to have some time on Polaris. So the two scenarios there might be, right, if you're completely ready, you've been using GPUs and other platforms, and you have a good use for Polaris that's consistent with your proposal, you may feel free to ask for that renewal time on Polaris. I would encourage, just in case we're running into issues of the balance of projects, right, have a backup plan for, if your original time was on Theta, but if we could get Polaris, we could do this. Feel free to do that, and we will absolutely be considering that and encourage that. The other thing we also encourage for renewals is if you are not as ready but want to be, I encourage renewals to ask for time on Polaris if they think they have the sort of the people time to put into that readiness. We can help you with that time as well, right? Our staff can be there to help you with considering how to use the GPUs on Polaris if you have not really tackled that already. And I know that there was a related question about, will this help with Aurora readiness? In the span of the next short numbers of weeks, I can give you a much more detailed answer to that, but my general answer is going to be yes, it will, especially if you're working with one of our staff members. It will be time very well spent in your readiness for Aurora.
Yes, the question was indeed if Polaris nodes are similar to those of Aurora.
And that will become very clear in the next few weeks, because we will announce it and you'll see exactly what they are. I just can't, right? And I have to avoid sort of even in sort of making approximate comments, especially considering sort of where we are in the stages of procuring a system. There are times where you really have to be very careful what you say. The system is being finalized, all the paperwork now. So, but what I will say is what I just said, is that this will be time well spent. This is not, these are not the Aurora GPUs early, but it's a system we are deploying in order to improve readiness.
Next question is relative to the machines. In the case of a 2 and 3 year project, will it be possible to ask for time on both Summit and Frontier? And if one decides to ask for time on Frontier, is there any rule of thumb on how to estimate resources, like, for example, based on the uses on Summit?
Dima, do you want to, I know you answered that in part, do you want to augment or?
Yeah, sure. So basically my answer was that yes, of course. Yes, you can, if you apply for 2 or 3 years INCITE proposal, you can request a Frontier time. So the second part of the question is about the sizes of those projects. So you should think about the Summit equivalent node hours, and the average proposal or average request on the Frontier should be around 3 to 4 million Summit equivalent node hours. So I saw in the chat there was some back engineering of the numbers. So obviously we cannot do that. It's still under NDA, and if we give you exact numbers, you can figure out some details of the architecture which the vendor don't want to share. Yeah, so that's why we're a little bit vague, as Katherine already was mentioning. So the same situation applies for the Frontier as it applies to Aurora. So I hope that clarifies. So average on Frontier should be 3 to 4 Summit equivalent node hours. That's the proposal we would expect.
And a larger statement I will make is we all on the INCITE side and at the facility side understand the challenge when we're saying we can't tell you the exact thing, right? We're just giving you some guidance to estimate your numbers. So we understand the impact of that. We understand that, that these are not going to be the exact numbers that you will likely need. And it is why we tend to revisit these estimates as we move forward in time, and we're able to help you make a better estimate. What we want to make sure of is that we're within the rules of the estimates we're giving you, we can tell you that, a node hour is worth about, a node hour on Aurora is worth about this many theta node hours or something like that. We're trying to make sure that you have an equation basically that you can sort of make some estimates with. If those are not adequate, please talk to us, right? So, for example, right, and it's a totally reasonable one that I don't have off the tip of my tongue right now. If you're like, well, I have, Summit hours, can I make should I make an approximation for Aurora? We can also give you that guidance. And it just occurs to me, I don't have that written down in front of me right now. But please, we understand these are approximate, and we're asking you to hand wave. And we know that you are, and that's okay.
Another question is the distinction between potentially a new proposal and a renewal. This is a PI which currently has a 1 year INCITE project. So the question is, I assume the new submission is not a renewal. Please confirm.
Yes, that is true. So that it is a new proposal, even if you are continuing your work. Some projects we have specifically choose to do 1 year after another, so they can choose to compete as a new proposal each year. Some proposals I realize don't, right? A two-year proposal might be only awarded one for various reasons. But unless you are explicitly told that you can submit in the renewal process, you do need to submit a new proposal.
And an additional question about the renewals deadline, which we repeat is in July 23rd. And now the next question is relative to the management plan. So can we include team members who may potentially be in another proposal as well?
Yep. Yes. The one thing I would consider with that is the conversation absolutely comes up about whether there's enough people cycles to get work done, right? So if you are proposing, that you have people who are cross-pollinated across proposals, just keep that in mind. If it looks like someone is being overburdened in the proposal, that might come up in conversation. And so just put, a second of thought into that maybe and consider whether you need to clarify that in the proposal.
There are still some questions, but if you want, since there are, in the interest of time, some slides to cover, we can move them at the end for those who will have some time. Would that work? Thanks.
Yeah, and as I said, this is mostly sort of in summary, and I will try to not keep this too long. I will point out that on the DOE Leadership Computing site, right, that will take you to where you create your proposal and you can start editing it. You can save it, and at any time, this is not like a one shot, and you go just like, most sites at this point, you can save and come back. Even after submitting your proposal, until the INCITE deadline, you will still be able to edit and resubmit it, so you can make changes. So if you just want to sort of make sure something's in and then you realize there's a mistake before the deadline, feel free, you can come back. I talked a little bit about this, so about how we make the awards already, right? That we have the awards committee with the directors, the program manager, and the directors of science, along with other parts of the senior management from the facilities. I will say that the important thing to keep in mind is that the first thing we look at are the most meritorious proposals, those that the committees were most excited by and said, please fund these proposals by all means. We use the computational readiness at that point as sort of an assessment of the risk or the effort associated with making sure those proposals can be successful. If a proposal completely fails the CR, right, but they're very highly ranked, we might reach out to the PI after the decisions are announced and say, please, let's work with you for the next year, get you computationally ready and have you compete again. But beyond that, it's looking at sort of determining how much people time on the facility side might they really need in order to move forward, or how much risk is the facility taking on because this project might not actually be able to get up to speed for the first year, right? And then we've got potential time sitting on the floor, and how might we manage that? So it allows us in this awards process to assess that risk and to sort of balance the projects we have based on that. So really the computational readiness review is really that secondary filter sort of once we're looking at these meritorious proposals. And the rest of these points, right, in that decision process really just kind of emphasizes that, because part of the award process, part of our determining the portfolio and the total number of projects we have is because we have a pretty robust support model for those projects. You as a project, if you want to engage with the facilities completely, could have a pretty significant fraction of an FTE of one of our computational science staff. And so we want to make sure that person is available to you should you be successful and get an award. There is an appeals process. I will just quickly comment on that. This is more to make sure that there were not any procedural or clerical errors in the process of assessing your proposal. We don't necessarily go back and challenge the scientific merit of the findings there. As mentioned earlier, we will announce awards in November of this year, so that should give enough time for especially new projects that have to fully ramp up, right? So sort of get accounts, get projects, everything set up, and also get connected with your catalyst or your liaison, your computational scientist expert at the facilities. But basically, when you get an award, you'll get an email, and that will be followed by a barrage of other emails from the appropriate centers with all the information you'll need about how to get started, how to get set up, and how to move forward. I will point out, as a PI on the INCITE proposals, INCITE award, sorry, you have some responsibilities. They're nothing that I think should be very surprising to anyone, especially, if you're getting grants. These all sound sort of similar. We do have a quarterly status update that we ask for all proposals, and it is really quite important to us. In part, it provides a quick way for you to sort of throw down any publications, awards, covers, presentations, anything you're doing where you're publicizing the work. Dima talked about this already, but it also allows a quick touchstone on your milestones, and can, even if you're in close contact with the facility, can sometimes be an easy document to sort of be like, all right, here's, just a quick page of, checking some boxes to sort of say, here's where things are going right or going wrong. We beg of you, right? We are funded to help produce science and engineering results, right? We pay our bill basically to the Department of Energy, figurative bill, by providing them with science and engineering accomplishments, providing them with impact from having their facilities. So as a PI, we cannot emphasize enough how much we run on talking about your science. This does not mean that we're going to scoop you. There's always, embargoes and things like that, and we're very familiar with working with those. But those highlights are very important to us, and it is how we continue to be funded. So you will be asked about these, and we really ask that you engage with us, because what we also want to do, if we're writing a story or a highlight on your work, that we properly represent it, and nobody can speak for your work as well as you can. We do, remind you that if you have a multi-year award, you need to submit that renewal, and we will try to help you do that and remind you of deadlines as we go forward. But we also ask that you talk with your teams about being good citizens on the systems, right? We have, we try not to have them be onerous rules, right? We have sort of ways we operate these systems, and we ask that people pay attention to what they're doing and be aware of what they're doing, and feel free to ask questions, right? If they have concerns about it, but mostly just to be a good, aware citizen as they're using them. And in all of that, right, we really encourage you to have you or your team attend the user meetings and workshops that we have. If nothing else, we've found that these types of meetings are an incredibly good way to sort of break down the wall of sort of communicating, right? Once you have that sort of more personal interaction with somebody. Even we have found, right, between Slack and Zoom, it's not as good as like sort of sitting down with a coffee with someone, but we've even found in this past year that those are very effective mechanisms to sort of breaking down sort of the worries about reaching out and talking to the facilities and making sure we're doing everything we can to help you be successful. And I'll just remind, the final thing is I will remind, we need those acknowledgments and papers. This goes back to how we pay our bills to the Department of Energy, how we can be successful, right? From the Department of Energy's perspective, it is these acknowledgments of the work. And finally, it's a small world, right? So that if you are successfully using the INCITE program and the leadership computing facilities, let your agency that funds you know that it can be a very useful conversation. And it is not just even helpful for us, that can be very helpful within the Department of Energy and within OSCAR, our funding agency, to understand who's using it, and as we're building broader collaborations within the larger complex, the DOE. And contact us if you have questions. We want to hear from you. We want to understand, what the concerns are of our user population, please. And these are just a bunch of contact information, that some of these you've already seen, but feel free to reach out to me for the INCITE program and to the facility specifically if you have questions. All right, that is all in terms of the slides.
We still have some questions and answers.
Yeah.
Do you want, maybe eventually we can address them now?
Yeah, I want to make sure we answer the questions that we have, and I encourage, if you have to drop off and we haven't answered, send me an email. You can yell at me for taking too long, and I will answer your question or get it answered by the right expert.
So one question is relative to AI applications and proposal that could include some development work. So can pointing to open source implementations of certain architectures and applying to science data be acceptable?
So if I understand the question correctly, right, if you're asking if that is an appropriate sort of basis for an INCITE proposal, it can be. Absolutely, right? Especially if there's a case associated, right, with why you need the leadership computing facilities to do that. So there have absolutely been historical projects where what they're doing is providing a capability for a community, right, to be able to use, in this case, a large scale system. And that goes through the sort of the same assessment of how impactful that is, and that's absolutely a reasonable basis. If the question is associated with, whether that's an appropriate component of development work within a larger proposal, absolutely, that is reasonable. Many projects have a component of development work, and I think that is crucial, especially when you're looking, at projects that are using large-scale systems. What we ask to understand is sort of what the trajectory is of that development work, and what I mean is, does that feed into milestones in your second year, right, or something like that, right? What's your time frame on the development, and what does that feed in? So is there a dependency that will impact the success of your work? And normally that's just really valuable as we're understanding your project, right, and the risk associated with it. If that did not answer your question, let me know. I was trying to imagine both scenarios.
So next one is relatively to the strategy to follow with regard to the early career. So it's from Jaluk Bay. For a given proposal from a team with a senior researcher who already had INCITE awards as PI and an early career researcher who could be PI, it is more strategically advantageous to have the senior researcher as PI or the early career researcher as PI?
Oh, it's an absolutely superb question. And you can imagine as we were discussing this, right, that this crossed our minds, right? That we immediately even thought, of this scenario and wanted to have some good sense of the guidance to give. So my response is that that it has to be your assessment of the risk and benefits for the early career proposal and track, right? With someone early in their career, we understand that some of these early career people will be coming, from already successful groups, and that is fine, right? Part of this is to give that early career person who is successful in INCITE the benefit of having that success on their CV, right? And going, look, I was able to successfully do this, and there's a lot of benefit to that, right? Even when you have the support of a more senior PI behind you. Without a doubt, right? I think if you are a senior PI, you are a known person in the field, that is also a big benefit. But I would say that my history of watching the peer panels and engaging with the peer panelists is they understand, right? That this is why sort of the early career has been going on a little bit in the background for years. They will look and go, okay, this person, I think, oh yeah, this is a student of so-and-so. And look, so-and-so is actually even listed here. Okay. So they understand the sort of the history of this person, and they're able to, sort of realize that benefit. So I can't immediately answer what is the more strategic advantage, right? Depending on who you are, but I would say that we understand this. I don't perceive this as gaming the system if there's an early career person coming from an already successful research project and they're switching the PIs. It is, I don't think will harm potential. It will not, make anybody angry. We understand this is how the world works. I didn't quite answer your question. I kind of put it back at you, but I'm mostly saying we understand that, and I think it is very consistent with how we work. So that's okay.
Next one is about Polaris. So is HEAP for GPU fully supported on Polaris? Just double checking. I can reply or...
Yeah, go ahead, Marta. Feel free.
Yeah, so basically about Polaris, unfortunately, we don't say too much, but HEAP is included in the list of software that we are expected to deliver. If there is any particular functionality, because you emphasize fully supported, let us know and we can check that. But in principle, it's supposed to be in Polaris. Next question is, do you have advice on constructing a 3-year plan with Frontier and Aurora? The remarks above suggest treating Frontier in year 2 as much more summit, correct? What about Aurora?
Yeah, I think that's about, and anyone, I should have said this, anyone should feel free to Dima, Marta, feel free to contribute, right? I think that's right. In the end, the consideration if you are targeting Frontier or Aurora in your second or third years of your proposal is that, yeah, you're looking at this absolutely huge jump, right? Just on broad orders of magnitude in terms of compute capability, right? Which is crass and not the complete picture, right? You're jumping 5-ish times, and you're jumping, something like 15 to 20 times. So it's a huge jump, and you can sort of consider it with that. In terms of strategies, the one thing I think that we are going to be looking for is understanding how your science can kind of step up and tackle that big jump. And I know that the panelists will be looking at that. It's the type of question that they're really considering, right? Are you ready to jump your particular study, right, that much in terms of accuracy or in terms of scale? So another way of phrasing that might be that we understand that for many projects, that first year or two on Frontier and Aurora, they're not going to be as big as they might eventually be, right? You have work you need to do to scale your science, and that first year you're on that system might not be, supersized, right? We tend to have more projects of a more modest size early in a big system's life, because people have to actually transition to it and get their science finally ready. There are some projects, obviously, that through the early science, the car and exascale computing are very ready, will be more ready than others. But for the large fraction of our audience, we understand that there's a bit of a transition. So it's okay if it's not giant footprint in that first year.
And just two more questions, at least on the chat. One is regarding to potentially contingency plans. So should proposals for Frontier and Aurora include a contingency plan if one of the other is delayed?
It's an excellent question. And we can even talk about more about this one-on-one if a particular project has a concern. And the reason is, we know that the real estate in these proposals is limited, right? There's only so much space. But it is valuable to understand, right, that contingency or what you could do if you were using another resource in terms of delay. But we do not ask, right, a risk contingency plan within your INCITE proposal. So we're asking for your proposal given this time frame. And while I love the idea, right, I also don't want to ask you to sacrifice the space in your science case for that. But it's from a facility perspective, not as an INCITE program manager, but from a facility perspective, it's not an unreasonable idea. But I can also talk about that in more detail one-on-one if you would like.
And last question, we addressed it in words, but probably we can put it in the slides too. So it will be useful to get an idea for reasonable node hour numbers per year for both Frontier and Aurora to request. Yeah. For Aurora, I was mentioning 40 to 50 million node hours as a reference. For Theta, it was 1.5, 2.5 million node hours. And but if you want to add more, Katherine? Yeah, we can certainly add it in the slides so it's visible.
I think that's a very good idea. You're right. That actually a summary slide, because we have so many systems coming through right now. We will create a slide that has a that guidance for all of the systems for 2022 and beyond. Yeah.
So just to make the picture full, the Frontier will have 133 million node hours.
Summit equivalent or native?
Summit equivalent.
And you repeat the number because I was going for the mute button.
It's 133. Actually, the guidance didn't change from last year. So it's 133 and an average of 3 to 4 million Summit equivalent node hours on the Frontier.
And one thing I'd say, like I'll augment this and say that with if you've been looking at INCITE for the past few years, you are aware, right, that for Theta, because it is actually very small machine at this point on the grand scheme of things, our total number of INCITE projects has fallen significantly on that system as we try to give projects a much larger fraction of the total machine. You can expect that will not necessarily persist, right? So we're not looking at, in the first year of Aurora especially, right, 15 or even 20 projects. That's normally not the way it will run when the system hits the floor. And whether it will be 30 or 40 or 20, I can't necessarily say. I think a lot of it depends on how it plays out, but it's going to be, closer to that range than the 12, 14 numbers we've seen the past few years.
133 million hours is what's available to INCITE project, not the total 100%, right?
Yes, we're talking about INCITE.
Thank you.
There are no more questions on the chat, but if someone in the audience, please feel free to unmute.
All right. Well, as I mentioned, we are here to answer your questions, and I mean that in a broader sense, not just physically on this call right now. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me and the facilities if you have questions, and we would like to help you with them. We'd like to understand what they are. And I appreciate your patience today and your joining us. Thank you very much.